Hello and welcome to the vlog. Since the last vlog I've bought another pack of those silver sound deadening mats and I've filled in whatever gaps there were left in the van, including on the roof, and I think there were a couple of other, but I've put those mats up. I've also had confirmation from a viewer that it really does make a difference having the sound deadening mats even if you're going to put insulation on top of them, because I was pondering whether the mats were really needed. But apparently, from someone who has tried both ways, it really does make a difference. So I'm glad that I have done that. Speaking of insulation, that is what my attention has now turned to. And I was going to do a bit of a rant about different insulation types and why so many van builds on YouTube just seem to do anything that they think looks nice, or that they saw in another YouTube video, or their mate told them down the pub, without really a lot of science behind it. But I don't need to, because someone else has made the perfect insulation video. In fact, he's made a whole load of very, very good videos. If you don't know who I'm talking about, it's Mr. Greg Virgo, and I will leave a link to his channel in the video description below. If you are a potential van builder, go and subscribe to his channel and watch his videos. This man talks sense. He really does know what he's talking about, unlike 99% of YouTube videos. He's done a brilliant one about batteries and electrics and how you wire up the van. He's done two super videos about insulation, the first one of which is all science, but he explains it so well, and it really is something I would urge you to go and watch, and it saved me a whole load of bother because I can just direct you to go and watch his video. So stop watching, press pause, go watch his video, come back. Back? Okay, good. So the main thing for me to worry about in my van, insulation wise, is that I'm really restricted on space. It's not so bad on the width, but it's very cramped on the roof and the floor. And of course, normally with insulation, the thicker it is, the better. That's why they tell you to have, I think it's something like 200 millimeters of this stuff in your loft, isn't it? To make it properly insulate your house, oh, you need 200 millimeters. That's 8 inches. I can't lose 8 inches off the ceiling here, and likewise on the floor. So I need the most compact insulation because I've got so little space, and that is inevitably going to mean compromises on what I do here. I've bought some of this loft style insulation. This is recycled plastic rather than the itchy fiberglass, and I'm using this on all the really awkward fiddly spaces where you just need something to squish in because it's going to be awkward to do it any other way. For example, I've done these two back doors with that insulation, just packed it in, got my arm right up in there, packed all the insulation in, and then put the covers back on. For the ceiling, because I'm so limited on height, I need something that is better than this. And the stuff that's better than that is this Celotex insulation board. It's twice, I think, the insulator of loft insulation, so you can use half the thickness. That said, I still don't want to use more than about 25 millimeters because I'm just so restricted on the headroom. And the trouble with this is, although it's a good insulator, it's quite brittle actually. I mean, it's sort of firm if you spread any weight out on it, but you can push your finger through this stuff and damage it. You can snap it with your hand. It cuts very easily with a sharp knife. But unlike the loft insulation, which you can just put into anywhere, this stuff you do have to cut. And oh, you'd think this was a square van with nice square shapes, but it really isn't. And I've had to take a knife and do all this intricate cutting and messing about to try and make panels that will go on the ceiling, just because of all the little metal protrusions and sticky out ledges and inexplicable wiggly bits that you get in a van. But I've done the first 3 panels for the front of the roof, pretty pleased with those. It looks like they're going to fit, and obviously I'm going to have to do the rest. Now the sides of the van, I've got about that much width to play with. It's much more easy. I'm still going to use the Celotex insulation because it is such a good insulator, and I think I'm going to make up some cardboard templates for all the tricky bits and then cut out the Celotex to that, stick it on, and maybe fill in any gaps with this as well. The floor, well, that's a whole different ball game. I don't want to stick even 25 mil of Celotex on, And I was umming and ahhing about insulating the floor at all, and people have said, oh, you must insulate the floor. So I've got a compromise. I'm not insulating it, I'm going to use the reflective foil stuff. Now, a lot of people will shriek at this point, and rightly so, because reflective foil isn't an insulator, I understand. It's a reflector. It works by bouncing back heat that comes through as infrared. So all things give off infrared radiation, heat, and the reflective foil bounces it back. That's why I've got it behind my stove on the narrowboat, and it works really well. But, and this is the point that a lot of van builders seem to miss, it doesn't work if you put anything on top of the foil. As soon as you cover the foil with anything else, the foil can't reflect, because it's like putting sunglasses on your eyes or covering up a mirror. If the mirror can't see the light, it can't reflect it. And equally, the silvered bubble wrap insulation cannot reflect infrared heat if you've covered it up with anything, because it can't see the infrared. So you've got to have an air gap between the silver foil, air gap, and then you can have something else if you want. But as soon as you squish the two together, the foil does nothing. Anyway, bit of a rant. The point is that the heat in the van will largely be escaping upwards through convection. Hot air rises and it will try and get out through the roof. That's why the Celotex is going to do such a good job. Down below, you're not really going to get convection heat trying to escape. It's going to be more conduction and radiation. So the flooring, the ply floor, will heat up gently over time, and any heat from that will try and radiate downwards through the air gap between the ply and the floor of the van. Don't forget the ply is going to be on little joists. So if I put the reflective foil underneath, reflective foil, air gap, ply floor, then the heat that's trying to go downwards will get reflected back upwards, and in that way, hopefully, keep the van warm. There's a very loud diesel car going past, so I shall just try and ignore them, and hopefully they'll get on with it. Bear with me. There we go. So yeah, I've only really got space to do the reflective foil, but I'm hoping that since any heat going downwards would have to be radiated heat anyway, it will be okay to use the foil. But there will be an air gap between the foil and the ply floor, and that will enable it to do its job. The heat comes effectively through the ply floor, bounces off the foil, and then reheats the ply floor again, and in that way the van keeps warm. That was all rather long-winded, wasn't it? Probably time I actually got on with some insulating. Let's start cutting the Celotex sheets that will go on the ceiling and the sides. As you can see, this is quite a fiddly process of just cutting and holding up and checking again. And what I've done on this one, I've put a very slight sloped edge on that side because it's going to slot into that cross member at the front there, which has a slightly curved edge on it. And then here you've got a 90-degree angle because of these cable ducts, which I can't remove. So they're going to have to stay in place. So that's going to go there, and it's going to go flat against that. So that is roughly right. And if I now just have a look at that, that is pretty good. Actually, little bit of trimming on the, ow, don't whack your head while you're doing it. Little bit of trimming on the front edge of that because there's a little bit of a lip of metal, so I'll need to just trim a little bit off there, and that should go in perfectly. And that is the 3 boards for the back bit of the ceiling cut, bearing in mind that in there I'm going to drill a hole in the ceiling for a fan, so that middle section of insulation is going to have to go up after I've put the fan in. But I'm pretty pleased with that. what I'm just doing is cutting out a very tiny section here to a depth of about 5mm, because that's where one of the bits of metal on that strut sticks in by. So I'm trying to shape this really as precisely as I can, and I know it's possible to get a bit too obsessive about this, but it's not that hard to do. It cuts with a kitchen knife, and it is a bit rough and ready anyway. But if I can pack the insulation in as much as possible and just take a couple of notches out, then why not? Makes for a neater job. Right, let's try taking that out. This is a combination of measurement and just doing it by eye. And that little notch should mean the panel can press up, because the strut comes across here, and then there's a little dip in the strut. So by taking that bit out, I can make sure this presses up fully against the ceiling. There's one more to do somewhere around here, which I'll now just go and measure up. That was the first one. Now the second one is, well, let me see, that's 25. So if that starts at 25, that's starts 35 in, which is there-ish. And it's, what did I say, 70 wide? Hang on a minute. There we go, it's about 70 wide, so it'll come out to about there-ish. Okay. And we know that it is 16 deep, which is actually about that much. Although my edges are very, very approximate, because having cut this slanty edge on it, it's all a bit wibbly wobbly anyway. But let's go with that. Roughly lines up with that, so come on, there we go. Right, let's hope I've put those in the right place and in the right bit of board. Oh, that's going to be there. Yes, look at that. That's in the right place. Just about. So that will go up like that. In there like that. Get out of the way, you. Oh, it's not quite straight, is it? But that's as near as damn it. Not quite straight along there, is it? But you know what? I think that will probably do. Good. Happy with that. Hello. It's the next day, and I have spent the last hour and a half, I suppose, trying to put some of this stuff, the loft style insulation, into the near side rear ribs of the van. And it takes longer than you'd think. You think, oh, I'll just get some of this stuff and I'll stuff it into all the holes. But they're really inaccessible, and you end up trying to contort your arm up and around and into all these awkward holes that are just not quite big enough for your arm to go in, and you wish you had flexible elbows. However, that said, I think I've done a pretty good job of squeezing the insulation in. Here, for example, is one of the easier places to access, at the back at the top of the van, and you can see those holes, but you have to stuff the insulation in there so that it goes along towards the light at the back, and there's no way of actually pulling it in that spot. You just have to push it from this end And I also used a screwdriver pushed through those holes underneath to try and drag the insulation along, and as far as I can tell it has reached the light. And then in the corner of the van you've got this side corner strut thing, which again I've had to stuff insulation in. And the problem here is that there is some wiring to do with the vehicle's rear lights, the reversing light, the brake lights, all that. And that's all behind that insulation, which I just had to put in very, very, very gently, because the wires looked terribly fragile and I didn't want to absolutely ram the insulation in there. So it's just lying on top of the wires. Notice there that there is also this rib here, and I really wanted to get insulation in there, and in theory that was a case of shoving it in from that hole before I put that insulation in. But you have to get your arm in there round the corner and then trying to shove the insulation along, because again there's no real way of pulling it other than shoving a screwdriver through those holes and levering the insulation along. So I cut a piece that was the entire length and it got constricted halfway along, so I ended up cutting it off once I'd got to that area done. But I'm pretty pleased that I got that done. And then the other half of that is there, which was accessible through that hole there. But again, your arm has to go up and you're pushing it across, and there's all sorts of little unexpected metal protrusions inside there that try to lacerate your fingers. This is why it took a lot longer than I anticipated, but again you can see the insulation, there you go, just peeking out through those holes. So I have managed to get it in there. There's a bit of insulation there, but this is just the wheel arch. There's nothing to put anything behind there. And finally, this one at the top, again, had to go in from the corner, put your hand up from there or from there and shove it along. And luckily this is quite a square section and the insulation went along without too many problems, screwdriver again helping, and I've managed to get it all the way to yeah, the middle up. It sort of finishes about there-ish. So not bad, but I've run out of insulation now, so I need to buy some more.